Pleasure is all on my end. Thank you, as always, for having me.
Okay, so we've now taken a long look at a game in the preseason where we got to see the quarterbacks, including Russell Wilson. How guarded was the Steeler offense, and what did you think of it watching each of them?
My honest takeaway from the whole thing was I really hope that's not the stuff they're planning to run the regular season. Mainly, without going into too much detail, Sean Payton has been and presumably always will be very much a high to low read offense guy. Drew Brees is one of the best quarterbacks the game has ever seen because while outstanding in many areas, the one thing he really did well was read from high to low. He made very quick decisions. He knew where to go with the ball. Denver had Russell Wilson, and with Sean Payton calling plays, designing their offense, he was so inept. They didn't even just release him. They benched him after, 15 games?
Yes.
And are currently paying him $39 million to not be on their team.
Right.
I saw Russell Wilson and the Steelers offense running a lot of high-low reads in that game. And to the surprise of nobody who's watched Russell Wilson, he failed to pick up a lot of what was going on. He missed a wide-open play, which probably would have gone for a long touchdown on a skinny post that he didn't read correctly. There were others that he didn't. While I'm not at all going to claim he got all the protection in the world, everything that he needed in that regard. A quarterback's got to make plays. That's why he's there. And plain and simple, he didn't do it. It was frustrating because in many ways what it feels like is they're trying to implement a style of offense that you have tangible evidence that Russell Wilson doesn't do particularly well. And if that's what you're trying to do, you've got two problems mainly. One, your quarterback is going to struggle on a team that has had the quarterback struggle for the better part of the last 4 seasons. Or two, you're going to have to dumb down the entire offense yet again and really not set your team up for level of success. Mm-hmm. I feel what Arthur Smith was calling, and it's a preseason game, but it wasn't, they didn't game plan, but there was complexity in what they ran. Maybe not hot routes. Maybe they need to get the throw where it needs to go. That's what they're practicing. But to run even a basic offense, you have to have a lot more fluidity than what we saw, and it's new to everybody. They took a step back in a lot of ways, I think, from last season. You're looking at a team that I don't know if it moved forward, and they made significant changes along that unit. And if this is to be the result of all of those changes, you're looking at really kind of the same as it's been. And I don't know how much longer Mike Tomlin can pull 9 or 10 wins out of a team that doesn't operate at even an average level offensively in this era of the NFL. And it's frustrating to watch overall, because I think this time they do have the offensive coordinator to be able to make things work, but they're not directing it. It seemed to me, at least, they're not directing it in a way that is comprehensible for the quarterback that they have, and that's going to be a problem. I don't feel that they have taken a step forward, and they absolutely needed to take a step forward at the quarterback position. I understand that it's the preseason. This is what we have to go on, though, and I don't think anybody thought that looked good. It was an absolute train wreck, and we're used to saying that after Steelers games nowadays.
It's, you know what this does tell us? I mean, yeah, obviously he's well retired now, but man, does this tell us over and over again that even in his latter years, to me, how invaluable Ben Roethlisberger was, even if he was 75% of what he had been when he was in his prime.
Yeah, I think that if anything, Steelers fans can take away just how valuable a good quarterback can be. And in Ben's last season, he was hobbled going into the year. He broke down even more by the midway point of the year. He is still head and shoulders above everybody else that they've brought in. I'm not saying that they need to go out and find Ben Roethlisberger. I think every team would like to find Ben Roethlisberger if they have a need for a quarterback. Sure. But the lower level, even call it the average level in the NFL, for that position is a bad player. That's just objectively true. Anybody at the whatever measurement you want to use, the 16th best quarterback in the league is by appearance bad. They're below that and have been for some time now. Several games. They're not going to get anywhere with substandard quarterback play. I would have thought it would have been mission critical this offseason to marry the offensive concepts that you're running with the skill set of the quarterback that you have. In the past, they have not had a quarterback that could do anything, really, which was last season. And it became impossible to come up with any kind of scheme to help them out. Now, it's not that is not a sign of support for what Matt Canada was calling anyway. That clearly didn't work out. They had some success when they moved away from Canada, but still exhibited a lot of the same problems that they've had previously. Now they have the new offensive coordinator. They had an entire offseason to vet, to plan, to choose. They had some options. Granted, not the greatest options in the world, but you get a financial break with a veteran like Wilson who needs to revitalize his career if he's going to get one more big extension. To put those two together, playing in a very similar offense to what he just completely and catastrophically failed in Denver. I don't even have words to express that. I don't understand the line of thinking that goes along with that at all. I will say, though, it doesn't mean that that's going to be everything. That's what they're going to do. But I would really hate to see another year of an offense that's basically one read for the quarterback, combo routes not being run by receivers not getting open, which was another problem, too. Put that alongside the protection. Plays were there to be made. They don't have a quarterback willing or able to get rid of the ball where it's supposed to go and make the right read. And that's really what we saw in that game. And I can't imagine the Steelers coaching staff is real happy right now, because if we see the same type of start as we have the last couple of years over the first 4 or 5 weeks of this year, there's going to be a real problem. And I don't know how many more years of this they can take.
Well, and that brings me to the next part. I brought up the Atlanta Hawks before. Now, this year they did have the first overall pick in the draft based on the lottery. But the team that just either barely makes the playoffs or misses the playoffs but has a winning record drafts lower. And I just feel like the Steelers have been that team under Mike Tomlin that never had a losing record. Right? They have not had a losing record under Mike. But at the same time, it also means you're drafting in the 20s more often than not, and I feel like this is catching up to them because they can't draft the quarterback like they did with Roethlisberger that can bring them out of this.
Yep, you hoped in some way they'd be able to go get a quarterback, but I'd be remiss if I didn't point out they drafted a 14 2 years ago. They traded up to get that spot 2 years ago. I don't think Broderick Jones is even going to start. And based on his performance against Buffalo, I don't know what's going on if they feel that he should start, because I don't think it would have taken Greg Rousseau, who's a good pass rusher. I don't think it would have taken Greg Rousseau to get 3 sacks. He gave up 3 sacks on what was it, 10 dropbacks? Yeah. He was miserable. He doesn't look anywhere close to ready to defend, to protect the quarterback. That isn't to say Broderick Jones is a bust. I still think this season he could be among the best run-blocking tackles in the game. He's that athletic. He has that kind of power, and he showed flashes of that last season. But after 8 starts at right tackle, after his second training camp, after one full offseason in an NFL program with the money that comes with that, I would have hoped to see a much better player than what I saw on Saturday. That's you can't start him. You just can't. People are clamoring about he's getting moved around to different sides of the ball. The things that he's doing are not specific to a side. They're specific to a position and a general concept of what you're supposed to do. He's off balance. You see it in his feet. You see it in his lower body. He's not going to be effective in pass protection. And whoever is going against him, teams are going to know he's there, and they're going to come after him for a variety of reasons. The Steelers are going to struggle hugely in protection right now, just based on what we saw, if he's out there. So as odd as this is, they trade up to get Broderick Jones. They draft another tackle the next year who's currently hurt. But if he's healthy, he's going to start. Troy Fautanu is going to be their starting right tackle. And somehow Dan Moore is going to get a fourth year of starting action for the Steelers. And that can't be what they hoped for going into this offseason. That had to have been seen as a liability within an offense that has a lot of liabilities. For them to have not improved in that area, along with the quarterback, is beyond frustrating. And I got a bad feeling that's what we're going to see come week 1 against Atlanta. They have guys that can rush the passer. That's the kind of thing they want to do. They're built to do that. There's going to be problems. I'm not sure Steeler Nation is going to deal with that for very long. It might not even be a quarter before people are really screaming at Tomlin, at Khan, all the moves that they're making and how they're not really panning out at the key areas that they should have addressed 2 years in a row now.
Which then brings us to the other part, and this is the part that'll, you either know the game or you don't. But you play offense to your defense, but you play defense to your offense. And if your offense can't move the ball, you are inclined to take fewer chances and play umbrella coverage because I can't afford to give up the big play. I can't afford to do it. How much of an effect can this lack of offense, because of the quarterbacks, have on a team that's going to have to rely on its defense?
The very, very simple answer is not much. But I would point out two things first. One, this is a team, the only team in NFL history to go 3 consecutive seasons finishing above 500 with a negative point differential. Okay, that's a major, major problem. And two, really shouldn't work this way. They haven't addressed it. The question you just asked, we could have asked at any point in the last 2 seasons.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. So, now the problem that I have is the offense from a playmaking perspective is potentially worse than it's been. It doesn't seem, just based on limited view, I'm not saying it's everything, but from this viewpoint, it doesn't look like their quarterback play will be any better. It doesn't look like their protection will be any better. What's going to be the difference? You hope that Arthur Smith can scheme his way around a few of these things, but I think you're loading up the same problem. And this is a year again. I mean, I've been saying this and trying to warn people. Pass rushers don't tend to get better with age. They get craftier, but they get hurt more often. They don't play as much. It doesn't take long to find statistical evidence to show if T.J. Watt isn't on the field, this team doesn't win.
That's right.
And it's probably because he has to win games on his own. Right. And he might be the only defensive player in the league that has to do that.
Right.
It goes to show his tremendous value to the team, but no other team is built like that. So at what point does the other shoe fall, and what's going to be the consequence of that? You can't continue to get subpar NFL quarterback play and expect to win games. If they have not fixed that problem, it's even more pressure on a defense that, as you well know, had an injury to a key player, had a suspension to another key player. Their back secondary was run by undrafted free agents who weren't with the team in training camp at one point. There's a lot of guys that played significant minutes for them, significant snaps for them, that won't be in the league this year. That was their defense last season. They held it together somehow or other. But how often are you going to get away with that? How much longer is that going to work? If you have a team that has even less firepower, depth-wise, offensively than it did, your defense has to be even better than it was. And it didn't work out last season defensively throughout. They were an excellent unit at times. They did a lot of good things, but asking a defense to stand on its head for 18 games doesn't work in the NFL anymore. And if you disagree with that, I suggest you go watch the playoff game against Buffalo. Yeah. It was over at that point. They were dragging. I don't know if their defense can really overcome that with what they've added and what they have coming back.
I just think it's too much pressure to put on one unit because again, it's 17 weeks. You're not going to in all likelihood, T.J. Watt's not playing all 17 games. In all likelihood, Joey Porter Jr. is not playing all 17 games. Same thing for Patrick Queen. On that side of the ball, you almost have to be injury-free to give yourself a chance in every single game.
If everything has to work out perfectly in what should be, a lot of different ways you can take this, but what I mean is the secondary part of the game. The defensive side of the ball, I'm not saying that that's not important, but you have to marry the defense with an offense that can beat you in 7 possessions. Steelers' offense doesn't score more than 3 possessions. So, and to ask a defense to allow only 2 is really hard because 3 scores in a game is way below average.
Yeah.
So you're asking them to be way above average every single week. It's just simply not going to happen in today's NFL. It doesn't happen anymore. You can have a great unit. Certainly, you look at Kansas City. Kansas City won the Super Bowl last year on the strength of their defense.
Yeah.
You know, I've talked a lot here about the phenomenal job Cincinnati has done defensively in their playoff runs the last couple of years. It wasn't Joe Burrow. It was their defense.
Right.
It's not that can't win come January, but they're limping into January with, honestly, some of the worst stretches of offensive football the league has seen in the last 20 years. If you can't get better than 17 points a game, typically, out of your unit, you're simply not going to win. You're not going to compete. And, yeah, to your point, everything needs to go right for you. Cam Hayward's a year older. He's more banged up. T.J. Watt's a year older. Minkah Fitzpatrick, as weird as this is to say, he's a year older.
Yep.
And it's not like you bolstered a ton of depth because you signed Patrick Queen. Not even top of market. You're not going to get all-pro kind of play, take over the game kind of play. You have to rely on health. That's the one thing you can't rely on. So it's a gamble. I don't know where they're going to be. I just know that this really was like, okay, no messing around anymore. We have to fix this offense. And they brought in a bunch of different guys, coaches, personnel, to do that. And I don't know if what I've seen through 2 preseason games gives me the sense that they're going to be able to do that.
No, I don't get that either. Now, I realize the first-round pick from Washington has been banged up. That hasn't helped at all. Broderick Jones, who knows what's going to happen. Frazier looks like he's a good pick as well. You feel like that part should be better.
You would hope so. I'd also point out, I think Mason McCormick is possibly, this isn't the way they'll go, but I definitely think they have a winner with McCormick, who may have been outplaying James Daniel, who's a very solid NFL guard. Nobody can question their desire to improve their offensive line, not over the last 2 years.
That's right.
They've absolutely made that investment. Everything that you heard about Satanu, he's coming along. I thought he was a little bit more polished of a player coming into the NFL. I thought he would have had a better chance to be a more effective rookie than Jones compared to where Jones was. But I'm not trying to preach impatience with Broderick Jones, but he's got to be a lot better than he looked on Saturday.
Yeah,
that was a mess. So it's you don't know if you're getting dividends from that yet. And this is not a team that really can be in a position to wait that long. You know, I get it his rookie year. I can give him a pass. We saw some rough stuff. We saw some pretty good stuff as well. And I'm not critiquing him for his run blocking effort performances, but his pass protection is such a liability. They're really not going to be able to pass anything 5 or 7 step drop, and then you turn into 3-step and release. The defense knows exactly what you're doing. You don't have the depth to really scheme much of anything, and now you're stuck, which is really where they've been the last 3 seasons.
Steve, thanks for the welcome to both. I really appreciate it.
All right, so just give me the moment when they finally told you, you know what, Rob, you're the guy. What was that like for you?
Interesting. I was in Porto, Portugal, with my wife on vacation, and looked down on my phone, and it was Reagan Berube from the Steelers calling me and offering me the job, and it was a little surreal. I wasn't in Pittsburgh. I was on vacation with my wife in a foreign country, walking down a small cobblestone street, and it probably would have been surreal anyway, Steve, but it was a little surreal, extra surreal because of that. But wonderful, and it sort of hit me at once and then hit me slowly, both at the same time, if you know what I mean. So
yeah.
It's been wonderful. It was a great experience, and I'm just thrilled that Art Rooney and the Steelers have put their faith in me, and I'm going to do everything I can to uphold that faith. And
you will. That will be no problem at all, Rob. It's you have to be the first Rob King. You don't have to be the next Bill Hillgrove or the next Jack
right.
Fleming.
Right.
In fact, the opening game I do will be down at West Virginia. Jack was the play-by-play guy down there for years. But between Jack Fleming and Bill Hillgrove, just can you reflect on the legacy of their work and the opportunity for you to continue that legacy?
Yeah, I mean, both were singular, both amazing. I never knew Jack Fleming personally. I've heard some of his calls.
Yeah.
Bill, I've gotten to know over. I was there for all but a handful of the years that he called Steelers games. I've been in Pittsburgh, and I heard him calling Pitt games. Wonderful man. Guy, he has that beautiful voice, that beautiful, rich voice that just is comforting. That's become part of what the Steelers are to people. And you're right. I mean, a couple things. First of all, you don't replace Bill Hillgrove.
Right.
You follow Bill Hillgrove, and
right.
You just try to do the job to the best of your ability. And I think that's what's important for me. Obviously, I think when you listen to the radio, whether you're listening to Steve Jones or Bill Hillgrove, or you just mentioned West Virginia, Tony Caridi,
yep.
Any of the other great broadcasters, you're probably picking up something, and those things probably help you. But I think at the end of the day, you have to be yourself. I'm a big believer in that. You have to be who
yep.
you are. And I think if you're who you are and do the job to the best of your ability, hopefully, enough people will like the job that you're doing.
Right, exactly. Because I succeeded Fran Fisher, and at Penn State, Fran Fisher was a legend. But you have to be you. I mean, you can't be, copy what they do. So now let's get to this team. Now let's get to the job. Yes, the job is about this team. Russell Wilson's going to finally get out there and get a few snaps coming up. What's your thought on what the combination of Arthur Smith can mean with the skill set of Russell Wilson?
I think it can mean the world, Steve. I mean, I really do. When the Steelers got solid quarterback play, and whether you want to ascribe the non-solid play at that position to the quarterback position, to the offensive coordinator, to a combination of the two, doesn't really matter. It's the most important position in sports, and it wasn't until Mason Rudolph came on in relief with the new offensive coordinator that the Steelers got some productivity from that quarterback position, won their last 3 games against teams that were, for the most part, in similar positions that they were. Cincinnati without Joe Burrow, trying to find a way into the playoffs, in contention. Seattle with their starting quarterback, not a super team, but a playoff caliber team in contention. The Steelers were able to beat those teams with that formula of, a new offensive coordinator and better quarterback play. Well, they're going to get better quarterback play from the jump. And Arthur Smith is, somebody came out, I think it was PFF, came out with a recent poll of top offensive coordinators in football. I believe he ranked 5th. So he brings that sort of gravitas to the position. I think that combination is going to prove to be very successful for the Steelers. I mean, it's the most important position in professional sports, quarterback. Russell Wilson has looked extremely sharp at camp. And I think that it's going to be a major upgrade for this team at the quarterback position, and I think that that's going to show on the field.
Rob, I was talking with Jerry Dulac the other day, and he said something that struck him is George Pickens has been putting on a highlight show in practice almost every single day. Your thoughts on George Pickens, but also the ability to balance it and put somebody on the other side that can be productive when Pickens gets a double.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think the one thing about George Pickens, until you've done it, you haven't really done it. And George, I believe George has the physical attributes, the capabilities to be that number one type of receiver. And I think the Steelers believe that too. Mike Tomlin sort of, made a little challenge last year. He said, listen, Antonio Brown got double teamed, and Antonio Brown found a way to get open. Well, if you can be that kind of a guy, then the guy on the other side, his job becomes a lot easier. They have a solid veteran in Van Jefferson. He was the guy that was, had some injury issues, and then, the Rams found themselves with an absolute steal in last year's draft in Puka Nacua, and so Jefferson was, the odd man out in that formula. I think Calvin Austin, call it, he's looked really good. He has looked really good, but call it more of just an overall gut feeling, watching Russell Wilson work with him after practice, seeing how he's been targeted in practice, seeing the fact that he's been moved to different positions and isn't just sort of a gadget guy like he was last year under Matt Canada. He's got to be able to block, but I think he's showing a willingness to do that. And I think for receivers, a willingness is 3/4 of the battle. Just get in the way, be willing to block downfield, because in Arthur Smith's offense, everybody blocks, and that means the receivers. And we saw it in week 1 when Scotty Miller, who's on the diminutive side, threw a block, and it turned a 10-yard gain into a 20-yard gain. Right. So they have to be able to do a lot of different things. I also think, Steve, I think it's going to be more by committee. I think Pat Fryermuth's going to have a bigger year. I think Darnell Washington is quietly going to see an increase in targets. And I think Van Jefferson, with all that, Jefferson, Austin, the tight ends, maybe a little more usage of the running backs coming out of the backfield, I think it's going to be a committee approach to being sort of that second target besides George Pickens.
And I'm glad you brought up Pat Fryermuth, Rob, because that's where I was going next. Because when I see an Arthur Smith offense, tight ends, and in this case, Najee Harris at running back, seem to thrive in what he does. Is that a fair assessment?
I think it is, and I think we saw it last year in Atlanta, where his tight ends were, first of all, he had good tight ends down there, but they were targeted. And in Pittsburgh, those tight ends weren't targeted. And I think Pat Fryermuth has every possibility of being a very good receiving tight end. I mean, I think there are a few guys that have sort of separated themselves from elite, and I think there's a big jump from where Pat was to that level, just based largely on the fact that he hasn't been utilized. So let's see how he's utilized, and let's see where the talent takes him. But I think wherever his talents are, and I think they're considerable, I think we're going to see that part of Pat Fryermuth and that part of his game evolve. He just wasn't targeted a lot, and he's a gifted player who I think is going to be targeted a ton. I think with the system I believe he's going to have a big year, and I do think that it's going to be in tandem with some other guys. I think Connor Hayward coming out of the backfield, more of an H-back tight end type of guy. Right. He's going to be productive. I really do think Darnell Washington, I wouldn't be surprised if he had 25 or 30 catches this year, which would be a huge jump for him.
Rob, in fact, part of this is that the offensive line with which all this is going to happen around, and especially for Russell Wilson, in my personal opinion, is exponentially better than the offensive line he had at Denver. And the Steelers, through the draft, and Jack Ham and I last year when we did the Penn State West Virginia game, were really impressed with Zach Frazier. And then the first-round pick out of Washington and Broderick Jones and so forth. Russell Wilson, I think, has an opportunity to have a much better year because he's just flat out going to be better protected.
Absolutely. You mentioned better year, and of course he was sat the last 2 weeks, and Denver is going down a different path. I think that is going to be, I'm curious to see whether that's going to work. I mean, they've, he's burned that thing to the ground, and now he's going to try to, build it back up. But Russell Wilson was benched with 2 games left. He threw 26 touchdown passes. That was twice as many touchdown passes as the Steelers had out of their quarterback position. Right. And he didn't even play the last 2 games. Yeah. So I think even that productivity level would be a welcome sight in Pittsburgh. It's been a couple of years since we've seen anything like that kind of productivity. But I agree with you. I think that, Andy Weidel, who is the assistant general manager, talked about that yesterday, and he brought with him, first of all, he's an old offensive lineman himself from the Pittsburgh area, went to Villanova, played some offensive line, and he loves building in the trenches. And he made the comment that travels well, a passing game. You go from indoors or out west or down south where the weather is nice, and you come to the Northeast in the winter and the ball's slick and it's cold out and it's sleeting or it's snowing. That might not travel well. Well, it sounds elemental, but bullying the other team up front, that travels. It does, and that's the point he made. It doesn't matter where you are. Big physical guys imposing their will on the other team, that plays in any stadium in America. And I think that the Steelers are trying to get back to having that kind of identity. You mentioned it. I mean, they've built it in the draft. They've added pieces in free agency. They want a certain type of offensive lineman, a certain type of player that will bully you, that will try to impose their will upon you. And I think they're starting to get that kind of a group together. I think it's an offensive line. Fautano, I don't know how long he's going to be out for. He suffered an injury, but he's very athletic, very good. Mason McCormick is a young guard that they really like. They got in the 4th round this year. I think that they're building an offensive line that is going to be far better than the one Russell Wilson had in Denver, for sure, Steve.
Yeah, it's something that Jack Ham and I have talked about for so long. 2 things travel: your running game, offensive line, defense.
Right.
So let's get over to defense.
Right.
I've asked all these offensive questions.
Sure.
I thought one of the, and you can place him 1, 2, 3, whatever. I thought one of the top 3 free agent signings was Patrick Queen, because A, you took him away from Baltimore, and B, he's really good. What has impressed you about Patrick Queen?
Well, I think just what you see out there with the closing speed. I mean, he is fast. Another point, we've been talking about it, and I'm glad Andy Weidel sort of underlined it yesterday. They are a faster team. They picked up in the trade Deontay Johnson for Jackson, the trade with Carolina. They picked up great speed at the cornerback position. They've already got speed with Minkah Fitzpatrick. They're faster at safety now with Deshaun Elliott. But Patrick Queen can fly. I mean, he can really move. I'll be extremely interested to see how they utilize him, because he's so good at so many things. He's good at stopping the run. He's good at coverage. He's good at blitzing. A problem of how you're going to deploy somebody who's really good at a lot of things is not much of a problem at all. It'll be interesting, though, and I think that I agree with you. I think that was a sort of an under the radar as far as national news. It made some news, but just for the style of football that you want to play, the sort of division you're in, the capabilities and abilities of the player, I think it was a great signing. And I'll tell you, Peyton Wilson, a young linebacker, has also really impressed. Another guy who can really run, a rookie. He had some injury issues in college, but he won he was the linebacker of the year last year at the collegiate level. He can really motor. So they've improved their speed overall, but Patrick Queen, I think, now gives them, playmakers at every position. Talked about Minkah Fitzpatrick and Joey Porter Jr., another Penn State guy on the back end. They're both playmakers. You had guys up front like Cam Hayward. Keanu Benton is an emerging player. And, of course, you had the 2 guys, Watt and Highsmith, on the outside. Yeah. What you were lacking was you had a really good, solid middle linebacker in Landon Roberts, but who's out there running around, making plays? And to me, that's so many turnovers happen because the way I would define it is something sudden happening at the ball. You're a running back, and you don't see – if you see a guy, you're probably not going to fumble. If a guy flashes – from your left and you don't have a chance to see him and he hits you, that's usually when the ball jars loose, or the quarterback is hit when he's trying to throw it. Something sudden happening at the ball. The Steelers really haven't had that since Ryan Shazier at that middle linebacker position. And I think Patrick Queen can be that kind of a player for him.
Yeah, they've been looking for that guy since since Ryan Shazier. There's no doubt about that. One thing about Watt, he'll demand so much attention. You may have to keep a tight end in, running back in, which, of course, takes them out of the pass pattern. It opens up life for Highsmith. Well, now I think you have to make a decision on offense with that running back. Am I going out to use him on Watt, or am I keeping him in because I got to pick up Queen if he blitzes? I think that the personnel they have has now made a multitude of problem decisions for offenses because of that, because you don't know which guy to double or pick up.
I totally agree with you. And, as I'm trying to explain football to casual fans, I try to explain to them how one player can ease the burden and make better 2 or 3 players around them. So if you're TJ Watt, well, you're not going to just leave a tackle on him like you might with another guy. You have to make the decision about a running back or a tight end. As you point out, now that guy's not going out into a pattern. What does that do? It makes life easier for a Patrick Queen or the corner on that side or the strong safety, whoever would have those coverage responsibilities, freeing them up to do more. And so it has a trickle-down effect. And I think great players like Patrick Queen, like TJ Watt, can have that kind of effect on a defense. It's not just what they can accomplish singularly, but as you point out, Steve, how they affect other players and then how they affect the opposing team's game plan that has such a huge effect on a game.
Finally, Rob, in the preseason, you always feel like roster spots 35 to 53 are probably at stake. How do you then eventually evaluate a preseason game to then help you get ready for the regular season, whether it's looking at 35 to 53 or maybe somebody doing a cameo?
I think, Steve, the biggest thing for me, look, I think that, the starters just want to get out there. They want to get a little work in. Certainly there are jobs up for grabs. Zach Frazier. There's a job up for grabs at the center position. Valtanu probably could have had the same effect, maybe pushing Broderick Jones to the left side. I don't expect to see him. He's certainly not going to play in this game. Whether he'd be ready for next week seems doubtful. He's not practicing yet. So there are certainly jobs up for grabs for sure. But I think for the Steelers right now, maybe, I don't know if it's under the radar, but if you're a casual fan and you're tuning in, keep an eye on special teams because they've lost a number of core players from their special teams unit. In fact, they went out and got Tyler Matakevich, who's been a great special teams player for them. They have Miles Killebrew. But a lot of guys who took a lot of snaps for them, they're gunners in special teams, they weren't available. And so, if you can prove to be a gunner, and it has to be in conjunction, right? You can't just be unless you're an unbelievable gunner. You can't just be a great gunner on a punt team and make the team. You could, but you'd like to be able to contribute in other areas. Right. So, that 35 through 53, I think, is interesting in that regard because that's a component the Steelers obviously put some attention in. They went out and got Cordero Patterson, who's an elite return man. They massively upgraded at the punter position. That net, Steve, is worth about 25 yards a game, and that's 25 yards a game is, just put it this way, the Steelers offense ranked 26th in the NFL last year in yardage per game. If you gave them that 25 yards that you're going to get back in the punting game by upgrading from Harvin to Johnston, they'd jump from 26th to 19th. That's what 25 yards a game can do for you. They talk about quote-unquote hidden yardage. So you've made this investment in special teams. Now you've got to find out where your coverage units are. So I think that's going to be something I look for. And obviously I think that, the second and third and fourth receivers and the nickelback. Beanie Bishop right now, I think Graylin Arnold might have had the inside track, a veteran, but he got injured. So now Beanie Bishop, and that's a relatively new injury for Arnold. So Beanie Bishop is going to be thrust into the spotlight a little bit. So there's always something to watch, Steve, as you well know.
Rob, I'm thrilled for you because you earned this, and you're going to have this a long time. And I'm thrilled for Steeler fans because you're going to deliver for them. Thanks so much for the time you gave us, and hope this is the first of many, many conversations.
I hope as well, Stephen. Thanks very much for having me on. I appreciate it.